From 1964, the Moody Blues with Go Now. Their version of the Bessie Banks R&B classic was a top 10 hit here in the U.S. in early 1965. And the man singing lead on that hit single is back with us again. Denny Laine will be performing with his Moody Wing Band on December 6th at My Father's Place in Roslyn, New York, and December 7th at the Iridium in New York City. Denny and his band will be performing songs from the Magnificent Moodies album of 1965 and the 1973 Paul McCartney and Wings album, Band on the Run. Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Denny Laine, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you very much. So I could just put you straight about that thing. I'm not doing all the Moodies. I'm doing the selection of songs from the first Moody Blues album that I was actually on. And then the Band on the Run album in its entirety. So that's really the show, plus a few other things I'm known for, of course.
You know, I was reading about your early life, and in 1956, when rock and roll first swept Britain, you were all of 12 years old, but you already knew how to play guitar, and you were ready to go, weren't you?
Well, I made my first, shall we say, solo performance at 12 years old, yeah. It was on a big theatre stage in Birmingham, where I was born, and I was doing a skiffle song. So you're chewing lose its flavour on the bedpost overnight.
Right, Lonnie Donegan, sure.
Right, yeah, I was a big fan of Lonnie. But I mean, I developed from that, because you see, about skiffle was it was kind of anybody could do it. You didn't even have to have instruments, really. I mean, it was teach us bass and a guitar, but there's a lot of skiffle bands around Birmingham when I was growing up. But generally speaking, I was very influenced by my sisters and my brother's music and my parents' music that was on the 78 all day long. You know, I listened to their ballads and stuff like that. People of their fans, they were fans of. So I brought up on all different styles of music. But skiffle was the easiest one for me to learn, in a sense. And I never really knew how to tune a guitar. Then somebody at school's brother was a big jazz fan, so then I got into Django Reinhardt and Ella Fitzgerald and people like that, and I started listening to jazz a lot. Well, I had a little bit of that with my sisters as well. They were into all sorts of that stuff. So, I mean, that's really where I got my roots, really. And then it morphed into, I was in school, I got into a band there. I was asked to join a band to the lead singer, and I ended up singing whatever the songs were on that set list. And then I got into rock and roll through school. And then Buddy Holly, of course, and, Eddie Cochran. Yeah. And Chuck Berry, of course.
What about the homegrown British rockers of the 1950s? Billy Fury, were you into any of those guys at all?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Adam Faith, Marty Wilde, Billy Fury. Billy Fury lived over the road from Paul McCartney, actually, in London for quite a few years. Yeah, I was into all of that stuff. There's the Shadows, man, they were great. The backing group, but they had a lot of hits. Like Ventures, they were like an instrumental band. Yeah. Cliff Richards and the Shadows was the biggest of all. Yeah. That was the first real big sort of English, star, was Cliff Richards. Can you believe it that Marty Wilde he did Sea of Love, he covered that. Yeah. And he had Justin Hayward in his band as a guitar player.
Are you I can't, but really? He had Justin Hayward there?
He had Justin, and he was a young kid. And also, Lonnie Donegan signed Justin to his publishing company. Can you believe that?
Wow.
That's how small a world it is.
It is.
But there again, I liked that whole era. I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis. I just liked that whole rock and roll era, really. And that kind of took over until I was about 18, 19. And then I started getting into blues heavily. So that's when the Moody Blues was born, because I wanted to play blues, and that's what we did. That's the style of music I like, I like authentic stuff, but I like progressive stuff too. You can't just copy, we'll never be blues artists, but we'll be influenced by them, and we'll do our own thing, based around the style that we like. And the thing about the Moody Blues in those days was we had a flute, we had keyboards, we had a different sound to a lot of people, and we had 5 voices in a way, or 4 voices. So we had this particular sound, and that's what sort of differentiated us to a lot of bands, really. We had a completely different approach to music.
Where did you record those very early Moodies records?
Well, it's interesting because most of them, Go Now for sure was recorded at the Marquee Studios, and the Marquee artists, Harold Pendleton had a thing called Marquee Artists, and we toured a lot in France. We backed up Sonny Boy Williamson. We played on the same stage as Fats Domino and all the jazz bands and all the things that came from America. We did a lot of that stuff through that agency. So that they built a studio eventually at the back of the club. But we also worked at places like Trident and Olympic and a few of the other studios that became famous later. But we mainly recorded that there. Really.
That first Moody Blues album, the Magnificent Moodies, obviously that was a long time ago. Did you have to put that record on to remember some of those songs?
Oh, yeah. The great thing that happened was that we finally got all those tracks and remastered them. And, the Moody Blues collection, if you like, was much more than that album. There's about 30 songs, and they put it on a box set. And re-released. So it was all remastered, and it was really good, and I enjoyed it because I was obviously listening to songs I hadn't heard for years. So I learned a lot of the songs from there, a few of them anyway. I mean, see, the thing is, we don't exactly copy the records. We do an updated version of them. I wouldn't be playing note for note the exact guitar solos and things like that. We extend things, put extra solos in, and we just turn it into a much more up-to-date version of those songs.
You mentioned this recent box set. It seems over the past few years there's been a little more interest in the Moody Blues in general, but also in those very early years. Yes,
that's true. And, it's helping us a lot with that. Ray Thomas's widow, Lee Thomas, she's spreading it all over the place, especially the Moody Blues fans who never really knew much about the early days of the Moodies. They knew about Justin and John and the later version, but they don't know much about. So, especially with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that brought it all into the audience again. So people have been revisiting that album, and it's become kind of a cult thing in a way. It was recorded by a friend of mine at the time. It was never really done much recording. It was Denny Cordell. Mm-hmm. Denny Cordell went on to do, Little Help from My Friends with Joe Cocker, Whiter Shade of Pale, just everybody. Denny went on and then brought in Tony Visconti. Actually, Tony worked on my first recordings with my electric string band as a sort of advisor and string arranger. And then he did the arrangements to Band on the Run, too.
That was Paul McCartney and Wings with Jet, track 2 from the 1973 album Band on the Run, and Denny Laine, formerly of Wings, and the Moody Blues, as we discussed earlier, will be performing at My Father's Place in Roslyn, New York on Friday, December 6th, and in New York City, Saturday, December 7th at the Iridium. That album, Band on the Run, is of course regarded as one of the great classic rock albums ever, but it was recorded under trying circumstances. As I understand it, the recording studio in Lagos, Nigeria, where you made that album, hadn't even been finished yet.
Well, you could say that about the Marquee studio, too. It's very similar, because they hadn't really finished that studio. Half the stuff wasn't fixed on the walls. It wasn't plugged up. So we went back to basics. And the same with Band on the Run. We had a great engineer, of course, and we had the minimum equipment. That was all hand-me-downs from EMI studios all over the world, I suppose. But it was a kind of a primitive setup, yeah. But anyway, you can do what you can do. You have a lot of experience from the past, and you can always come out with something. So it didn't bother us that much.
I know we talked about this before when you were on. That was a very prolific period for Wings, and there were a number of songs that didn't make the cut on albums for whatever reason, but have since come out on these expanded Paul McCartney archive collections. And it must be a real kick for you to hear a song like I Would Only Smile on Red Rose Speedway where it belonged.
Yeah, amazing, really. Well, I don't keep up to date with a lot of that stuff, but I know I've heard, of course, that people are pleased that it was on there. I mean, that was done with the first Wings lineup. That was with Henry and Dennis Sybor, Henry McCulloch and Dennis Sybor. And it was, for that time, I mean, it's supposed to be on a double album, but it never turned out to be a double album, which is going to be Red Rose Speedway. So, that's why that was shelved, and that happened to a lot of stuff. And so eventually, you've got all that backlog of material that will see the light of day one day. So I was very pleased about the fact that he put that on there.
Denny, before I let you go, I want to ask you about a Wings song that you co-wrote with Paul McCartney that was a worldwide smash, with the exception of America. And I don't bring that up to sort of denigrate the song or anything, because I love the song. But Mull of Kintyre in the UK, it became the biggest selling single ever.
Well, yeah, until the sort of whatever that song was, it was like a charity thing for Save the World.
Oh, right.
And then see, the thing was, Paul had that chorus. I went over to his farm. I was up in Scotland. I went over that morning for breakfast, and he played it to me. And he said, "Do you think we should?" And I said, "I think it's a great idea to do a Scottish song," because he was a little bit chicken about it. Really, he said, "Should we really be doing a Scottish song?" It might. Anyway, that's what happened. We got the Campbelltown Pipe Band on it. We recorded it outside in the mountains and the hills, and it was just fantastic, huge hit. It was enormous, and it came out around Christmas, which didn't hurt. And it was just, but they never put it out in America as a single, which I always thought was a bit weird. But they put it on a B-side. But a lot of people know it because they bought that Wings' greatest album. So.
And for those who don't, we're going to play it right now as we say goodbye to Denny Laine, Saturday, December 7th at the Iridium in New York City. Denny, thanks so much for being on the show today.
All right, thanks, Dave.